someone I would consider a mentor and a role model for me. How to help your team, your best people, create their own units of accountability, and how to do that in a way that works for you as a business owner so you can still feel confident that you're intelligently letting go of control. How you can make that courageous move in your company, even when you're scared.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, welcome to another edition of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, and today I have a real treat in store for you. My dear friend, Patty DeDominic, is going to be joining us today. Patty is someone who has been through the long gamut of building successful companies, scaling them organically, scaling them through acquisition. She's had many successful exits from companies that she's built. She's employed hundreds and hundreds of different individuals for different enterprises, and she's fantastic. And anytime I get a chance to be around her, to talk with her, I learn every time with that part. She's someone I would consider a mentor and a role model for me. She built her first big success PDQ careers, which was an HR consulting executive search firm staffing solutions company. She was won the award of the CEO of the Year from the LA Business Journal. She was inducted into the Women Business Owners Hall of Fame. She was the former chairperson of the foundation that runs SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, an offshoot of the SBA. She was the past president of the National Association of Women Business Owners. She's someone who's been a serial entrepreneur, going from success to success to success, learning lessons along the way, and she's a phenomenal business coach, and we're so lucky to have her. In this interview, you're going to hear Patty talking about control-itis and how she works with a business owner to see their way past that, how to create a cadence of accountability with a team member, how to intelligently and symbolically build culture by helping your team make and live with big decisions with that part, how to help your team, your best people, create their own units of accountability, and how to do that in a way that works for you as a business owner so you can still feel confident that you're intelligently letting go of control, to combat the desire for many of your team members to just show you the finished product in a ta-da moment, like ta-da, but to not be surprised along the way. She's also going to share a very important story in her past of how in her early first business, she had a business partner that embezzled and how she dealt with that. She's going to talk about how when she went off on her own, she had to borrow, and we smile at this today because the interest rates when she borrowed, secured by her home to go with her second company, was at 17% interest, because that just happened to be what the market interest rates were, something pretty relevant given where interest rates are today are higher than they were 5 years ago, 7 years ago. And we think, oh no, they're so high. But she shares about how you can make that courageous move in your company, even when you're scared, and what's an intelligent way to make that bold move. You have all this and more in store for you in this episode of The Business Coach. Well, Patty, first of all, welcome to The Business Coach. How are you today?
Hey, I'm great. It's good to be here with you. I always love to talk about coaching great businesses.
Oh, that's great. And you have so much wisdom to add. I want to go backwards a little bit. I always love to start talking to someone like yourself, because when we get a chance to meet you and spend time with you here today in this episode, we get to see the finished product. We get to see you after 30 plus years in business, growing enterprises, working, building your company, selling your companies, coaching hundreds, if not thousands of other people. But I want to go backwards in time. Tell me a little bit about the very first business you ever ran. Describe that, if you would, briefly, way back when.
Do you mean my first managerial job, or do you mean my first entrepreneurial enterprise?
Yeah, your first business that you owned.
Okay, well, I was 28. I started a staffing company, and I had been recruited by these folks who owned an executive search firm. And really, in those days, the more practical business was employment agencies. So an employment agency who did a lot of office staffing recruited me, tried to figure out if they could place me. And I said, no, I'm looking for a career, not a job. And and I need a company car, and I need a vice president title. I was pushy then too, David. Anyway, anyway, they scratched their head about that, and they said, you know, we always had wanted to start a staffing company, and why don't you consider doing that with us? And that was really a very soft launch for me, because I didn't have to do it all by myself, even though entrepreneurship had been part of my family legacy. My dad had been a business owner. And for the first, let's see, we did, I'm trying to remember how much volume we did the first year. I think it was 136,000. This was a long time ago, over 40 years ago, David. And we provided staffing services to companies like Prudential Insurance and Automobile Club and large corporations in Los Angeles. And then we started doing a lot of small businesses too, because I was active with the Chamber of Commerce. And I learned a lot. It was pre-email, you know, pre-Google. You had to put your ad in the yellow pages and wait for the edition to be published, and then hope that you'd get a few new calls from that, which I did. And I networked a lot. So that was one thing that doesn't seem to have changed. The face-to-face networking that's now done on LinkedIn was done in person. And I talked one employee into coming to work for me, and I couldn't afford her. So I cut my own pay back so that I could afford to bring her over with a lateral move, because I wanted to make her whole. And we just took off. It was the right time and the right place. 136,000 the first year, 350 the second year, 450 the next year. And about that time, I was like, okay, this is it. I thought business ownership was such a big deal, and I decided to have one more child. So I was actually reflecting in life, you know, well, what's more exciting, you know, having my kids or having a business? And before I had a business, I thought, oh, if only I could be a professional woman like all these other really amazing people that I see building businesses. And so that's why I went into business to try to be that person. But then after a few years, I felt like Peggy Lee. She did a song. I don't know. You're probably, some of our audience may be too young, but she did a beautiful song. It was called "Is That All There Is?" And so I remember having that feeling. Gave birth to my third son, and promptly found out my business partner was cheating with the IRS and a few other things. And he was doing the books of our business, and he was borrowing money without talking to me. So we broke up, but we had a friendly divorce, if you can call it that, a friendly business divorce. I continued on, he continued on. We were competitors for a few years until he went out of business. Hey, listen, I know right now people are worried about the interest rates. They've been up high this past year or two. In order for me to make a smooth transition from partnership to solo business owner, and it was a sole proprietorship for the first couple of years, I borrowed $50,000 against my house. Then the rate was 17%.
Gosh.
And that was just the cost of that leverage piece that I needed. And I borrowed it and I paid it back. And I think about that. And so when people say today, oh, I hate to borrow money at 10% or 5%, I think, well, it depends on what you're going to do with it. And you might not get a 10x return on that money, but if you get a 5x return, it's still okay if that's your best alternative.
Yeah. I think what you said is really important with that. I mean, you had that for you as this, in a sense, your all-in moment. You eased into the ownership with your partner, but your comment about when you discovered for you that this partner was not the right person to be in business with. It took a lot of courage for you. I mean, there you were, mom of 3 kids, to make the decision not just to go out on your own, but to actually borrow that. I'm curious, when you look at the business people that you coach, and you look at them that they're on the verge of making a big move in their business, that big move, and I'm going to put that in quotation marks, big move, it feels to them at the time like a big move, although you and I have been through enough of this and talked with enough people, coached enough companies, that what we consider at this moment a big move, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we'll look back at fondly and think of differently. But when you're coaching someone at that big move moment, and they're they're intimidated or scared by that, you got yourself to push forward with what you knew was a good decision. How do you coach somebody else to help do what's important for them in the face of what might be an overabundance of fear?
And fear is real, and imposter syndrome can be a very real thing too. And you wonder, is like, well, no, I just thought just smart, highly educated business people became company owners or were running companies. And how do I coach them? Well, I talk to them about the questions that are still on their mind. What is their biggest fear? What's the worst thing that can go wrong? And I was fortunate later to be able to go back to school, get some wonderful advanced training at some major universities, and on the negotiations that I learned from Harvard, they talk about what's the best alternative to no agreement. So I kind of tie that in when I'm coaching, and I say, what's your best alternative? What's the worst thing that can happen? And how could we either avoid that, or if it does happen, what measures would be in our plan B or a plan C? I think that's important. The other thing is, it is critical to surround yourself with mentors. That's why I do believe in coaching so much. I believe every champion has a coach or several coaches, and asking the right questions of the right people is important. And I think that's what keeps people down a lot. Sometimes they're asking business questions of people who failed, or sometimes they take their advice from somebody who brags about being homeless 5 years earlier, and now look at me standing in front of my jet plane or my Rolls Royce. And I'm always thinking to myself, when I see these people, why weren't you smart enough to avoid that in the first place, right? So I say, ask the right questions of the right people. So someone who's already been there, done that. More than one person. Your accountant and your insurance person and your lawyer are three people, and your doctor. You should have really intimate relationships with them, pretty honest and open, and be able to discuss your fears. Now, a good attorney is going to amplify some of those risks and help you see them for what they might be, and then figure out a plan with you to avoid them. A good accountant is also going to be concerned about what's the tax basis or tax ramifications going to be on that. And I want to prepare the business owner that your accountant and your lawyer may not agree, and your mentor and your coach may not agree. So what's important is that we as a business owner have to pull in the best advice that we can get, the best information, case studies, research, and then we have to make our own decisions based upon our reality and our work style.
You said some really important things there. I actually want to go back to three different items. I'm going to unpack this. This is really good stuff here, Patty. As always, you have a wealth of depth. So one of the things you talked about when you went and discussed imposter syndrome, you said to the business owner, hey, let's look at the worst realistic case scenario. I mean, obviously the worst case scenario is zombie apocalypse, everyone's dead or walking the earth, whatever. But your comment was, hey, can we survive that? And if so, how do we make that less likely, I heard you say, and how do we improve upon that worst case if it happened? And what are our plan B and C? You referred to the BATNA, the best alternative to a no agreement. And I like that a lot. Second thing I want to unpack here is your comment about talk and ask the right people at the right time, someone who's been there and done that, and get multiple inputs with that. I think that that's so valuable, this idea that we can only see our perspective, and like we're looking at a beautiful piece of art that's a sculpture, it's 3D. If we can get for different perspectives from on top, from below, from the side, we get to see it more fully. But there's a nuance that you said that I think is really important. You talked about how a lot of times the people that are trusted advisors, and they should be, our accountants, our attorneys, our insurance folks, you made the joke of the doctor, these people tend to have a frame of reference that, for example, the attorney you mentioned, his or her job is to, without intending to, their model will amplify the fear because they're looking for all the things that can come back and haunt you.
Right.
And so you said, how do we get the best from them? And I'm going to say something here, and I'm curious to hear your response because, again, I want to tap into that deep well of knowledge that you have. So I always would tell a client something along the lines of, look, I don't look for my attorney or my CPA to ask them, should I do this? I look for them to say that if I choose to do this, how can I do it more intelligently? It's one question I ask. If I choose to do it, how do I reduce risk? If I am looking to make the decision, what would you think would be the biggest reasons to do it? And what do you see are the biggest reasons not to do that? But knowing that almost always my attorney and most times my CPA are going to be more conservative than I will as a business owner. I'm curious to how does that resonate with you?
David, I think you learned to ask those questions through years of experience. And if you think back to yourself, perhaps when you were 22 years old, and we sometimes, back when I was 22 or 28, my attorney was 48, right? And so I was raised to respect my elders, and also I revered professionals in any category. So I absolutely agree with the advice that you just gave, your style. But I'm betting that when you were a baby entrepreneur or when first 5 years, you might not have been that way, because I know I was shocked when my accountant and my CPA almost went to fisticuffs when they were trying to decide how much to capitalize my company a few years after I started it to incorporate. And they both later told me that they thought the other was incompetent. And I just found out that it was just because my attorney was trying to help me reduce liabilities, and my accountant was trying to help me reduce taxes. And sometimes those things contradict each other, right? So it is important to ask the right questions. Also, if one had grown up with entrepreneurial family members, that's an advantage, right? You're used to them talking about maybe some of their investors or their employees. I grew up around a dinner table listening to my dad talk about his banker, and when he needed time for a loan, he always took his banker out on the boat. I mean, just stuff like that, little nuances that I kind of picked up growing. And I also, my dad built a food distribution business, which eventually was unionized by the Teamsters. And so I had a perspective about labor unions like that as well. So much that we learn the hard way. That's why having a coach makes a big difference, because you can basically shave 20 years off a 30-year career of trial and error if you have the right coach, and turn what took me 27 years to build a $50 million company. Now we're watching Maui clients do it in 10 years. And so that's really wonderful to see. In fact, as you know, we've seen a number of clients who have gone far beyond where you or I have gone in our previous businesses because of the techniques and ideas that we've been able to glean from all the different experiences that we've had when we've been one of the trusted advisors to a growing entrepreneurial enterprise.
Well, let's jump in and help some of our audience shave some years off of their time in growing and scaling their companies. And so a question I want to ask you is, here you are as a business coach who's worked with so many different types of businesses and so many different verticals with so many different types of owners. What's one of the things that you observe that a business owner, before he or she gets to you, they do to themselves? I call these the self-inflicted damages to their own business that they don't realize that they caused or certainly contributed to. Give me one example of what one of those might be.
Well, two things that just pop right out. One is they're workaholics, and I certainly was also, and my children suffered because I worked too many hours. And the other is fear of delegation, because what they want done is so specialized, and they're concerned that no one else can do it to their standard. So both of these things, in my opinion, are big mistakes. And if people are listening to this and they're working 50, 60 hours a week and it's not temporary, I want to tell you in the audience, you need to stop it immediately, because you're not going to get more done by working twice as much. And then the delegation thing, it does take practice, and to remember that every single one of us are replaceable. Even the president of the United States gets replaced or gets reelected every 4 years. So it's not like we are really the only ones who can do this, even though in our mind, maybe we were just too lazy to document the parameters of the decision, or we haven't taken time to think about what our mission and our vision really is. And if we can share our mission and our vision with the team and the people who really want to execute it, and they're kind of on this journey with us, then sometimes they're going to make better decisions than we would have made. So that takes a little practice, and it's like jumping in cold water. If you just do it one little tiny bit at a time, it can be torturous. So you kind of have to make a decision. You have to agree upon what the parameters are and share what the big vision is, and then allow the mistakes to happen, because that's how I learned. That's probably how you learn too.
It's interesting what you're saying there. So this idea of, the workaholic and the fear of delegation at root, I think, from my observation, is you have the business owner, and I'm thinking of one particular one we coached years ago who owned a glass business. She said to me, David, I tried handing off, I tried that delegation thing, and it was disastrous. We doubled in size, but we basically cut our profitability in half. And I remember early on asking her the question, well, do you think that there might be some commonality between all those experiences at that time of the delegation? What was the common element to that? And, the lesson she took from it originally was, you can't trust other people to do it well. They're not capable like you are. They won't do it, as you said, up to my quote, standard, close quote. What I tried to help her see and what eventually came through was this idea that she was the common element for all of her delegation. And that part of what was going on for her was not having had the really good skill of how to delegate, not really thinking strategically through what to delegate in what order, and then finally not having a model of how to delegate ownership of an ongoing function versus delegating a specific task that they have to then come back to you again and again to give them the next task. I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Well, some people think they're delegating, but they're really just dumping or abdicating. We've talked about this before. And even, at every level, there needs to be some audit or spot check or inspection. There needs to be a closing the loop and a circle and a cadence of accountability. I remember a woman that I hired as my office manager, who eventually, after about 20 years working for me, became a division president. And she's an extraordinary woman. She really wanted to run a group of people. She wanted to be known as someone who you could count on, and she was. But her favorite thing was to take a project and run with it, and then we would have radio silence. At that time, I didn't use big rock reports. I used a month-long accomplishment report, and I have since determined that a weekly big rock accountability report is far better than waiting a month. But anyway, she would take the whole thing, and then she would do it as she thought that I requested. And at the end of the month, I would get something that would look different than what I was expecting. And so I realized that that was my fault. I needed to install a couple of checkpoints along the way. And so I did. I said, after 2 days, I want you to get back to me and confirm that the due date that you gave me is still realistic now that you've had a chance to think about the rest of your whirlwind. And then the other thing is, I want you to just kind of lay out the plan and suggest the next follow-up date for a quick check-in. So is a bit of an art, because you want to hire strong people. Strong people don't want you looking over their shoulder, don't want you seeing all the hiccups that happen in normal life, and yet they're proud. But if you just make it a quick check-in and come to an agreement that they in fact are working on an oil painting, not a watercolor, or whatever the nuances are, then you're going to get things done much better. Now, I've also learned that sometimes their education and your education, my education in negotiations and in business, takes a lot of practice. I remember we lost a contract to somebody who underbid us by probably $100,000 on a $1 million contract. So it was already close. We probably only had about a 5% profit margin on that $1 million contract. And these guys came in at a loss leader so they could get that particular contract because it was a leverage point for national contracts of similar types across the country. So if they could get a foothold in Los Angeles, where I was, then they would be able to open the doors for all other 50 states. So they were happy to have a loss leader. Well, they did a poor job of that contract, so bad that, and it was a government contract, that the employees went to the community legal assistance group about a year and a half after I, was no longer serving on the contract. But because we had begun this particular outsourcing contract, when the community group, the Community Legal Aid Society, decided to file a class action lawsuit against the current contractor, you know how lawyers are, they just sue everybody, right? So
Sure.
we got served and that. I don't like litigation. I don't like fighting. I like avoiding stuff like that, or working around it, or coming to a settlement, because it's just to me a colossal waste of time and money. But anyway, so got our insurance company involved, got our lawyer involved, got our HR director involved and stuff. And I said, just make this thing go away. I've seen the depositions. The depositions are very much pro our company. And, the problem started when this new company came in and trying to do what they did at losing money. And then their managers just didn't know how to operate that contract well. Long story short, I just said, make it go away. They go, well, what? I go, I don't know. $60,000. If you can make this thing go away for $60,000, I can stomach that. So 2 days later, they came back and they said, it's gone. I go, great. How much? $60,000. So the only second thought that I had on that was like, darn, I should have said 30,000.
That's right. They took you literally. I'm sorry. I was thinking the exact same thing. Oh, I wished I would have gave them a lower number.
Right. But so, maybe actually we shouldn't have had to pay a dime because we were really, and the interesting and ironic thing about this was 2 years later, we got that business back at our prices too, by the way, because this national company who came in and tried to scoop us on that business just didn't understand the customer. And we had developed a whole team around that particular customer and being able to service them. So I didn't spend a lot of time worrying about, I spent an extra $30,000 that I shouldn't have. I said, okay, lesson learned. And next time we're going to negotiate. We're going to start a little lower and see what we get.
Yeah, I'm going to come back again and unpack several things you said. So first of all, I loved your comment, the cadence of accountability, this idea that there's a certain rhythm and timing for what kinds of updates I'm going to get with the people I'm handing off to. It's one of the skills. But at root of that, you said something I thought that I really respected, which was you framed it as when you had the issue with that one particular team member who was growing into this amazing businesswoman, but early on, some of the issues of maybe her going too far before you would hear back from her. You took ownership of that. You didn't say she didn't do it well. You said, hey, that was my fault. I didn't explain. I didn't ask for what I needed. I love that idea of accountability. I love that you said, I realized that when I changed that now, you talked about these checkpoints. For example, you mentioned your 2-day checkpoint and, hey, I've just handed off a project. This is really good leadership. I'm handing off a project to a competent person, but I recognize that she's not going to have all the information and have done all of her thinking on the spot. So let's circle back 2 days later to hear back quickly. Is the due date for the project and the criteria for the project actually realistic, or do we need to adjust expectations? And then 2, what's your rough plan for how you're going to accomplish it? And then you suggest the next follow-up date, and then you mention something important. Your very best people, it's a dynamic balance. You're going to want to hear progress, what's going on, as opposed to getting the surprise call 30, 60, 90 days later when it's too late to do anything, they're going to want to show you, I call it, Patty, the ta-da moment, like a ta-da, here it is, all finished. And
Right.
I have to explain to team members all the time, hey, I love ta-das, but the things that make me feel best are, and the way you keep me out of kind of coming in there is you give me updates along the way. I don't want to wait to the end to hear how it went. I want to know along the way at agreed upon progress points. I'm curious, have you come across that ta-da moment with people either that you've employed or the businesses you coach, their key staff members want to unveil the finished project when really they should be shrinking the units of accountability along the way? I'm curious.
All the time. You're so right, David. All the time.
When you talked about this, hey, you had a $60,000 to go away, you learned a lesson, right? The lesson was, I'm going to talk with them not just about the number, but about, hey, let's be clear, what's the number you start with and what are the increments that you'll increase that by, such that we pay no more than 60, but maybe we get out of this with 20, 25, 27, 28, 28.50. I love that. I like to ask the question to my team, you've just said this is your lesson. How are you going to behave the lesson, or how is your department going to behave the lesson? Is one I like. I'm curious for you, when you look at the coaching clients you've worked with, what's another common challenge that you see with a client that you work with that you've dealt with again and again? I mean, one of the advantages of working with hundreds of businesses is that you see Tuesday every week. It comes around after Monday and it comes before Wednesday. So you see the same challenges that happen with a regularity in various companies and various industries. What's another challenge that you see?
I think we've all been in meetings where you've got somebody like a Debbie Downer or somebody else who's going to just tell you what's going wrong. And I used to be of the school that you ostracize those negative people, but I realized that actually they're as valuable as the ones who are saying, great idea, boss. Oh, this is fantastic, right? So as you know, I love to use De Bono's 6 thinking hats, and it's such a simple illustration of the need to consider what are the benefits, what are the pitfalls, how is this going to work, what's this going to look like on the outside, what's it going to look like on the inside, what's the process, you know? And so those 6 thinking hats, I try to encourage all companies to run it through that filter so that they do welcome it. And then it's interesting because I was teaching this past weekend to a group, and we were talking about that. And this saying, "The truth shall set you free," that came up, and we were laughing about it because I said, "Hey, if you're unhappy about something, you have to share that. You can't just keep that quiet, swallow it." Now, maybe you have to be more diplomatic, maybe you have to choose your timing, but if you see your boss getting ready to walk off the end of a branch and that branch is going to break, you can't just sit there and say, well, he chose that branch, I'm going to just stay back. So I said, be brave enough to allow the truth to set you free. If you really don't like the company, if you really think they're making bad decisions all along, or in the case of a business owner, if you really don't like the clients that you have and, you know, that same kind of situation, then you've got to be willing to let it go. And that's really hard, especially when we were doing some strategic planning in our company one time, and we had just upgraded our mission and motto, and we moved from simply the best, which was kind of a little bit of egotistical, and then a few years later we realized, well, we weren't. So what did we want to be that we could be full of integrity with when we talked about who we were and what we did? We said, well, we're staffing partner to America's finest employers. And that became a galvanizing force in our company. And we said, well, you know, not everybody that we serve is America's finest. Or we'll say, well, not yet. They're not yet. But if they're striving to, we'll grandmother them in. And if they are not striving and they are a lousy employer, then they're not going to be on our customer list. And that required us, my team called me on $1 million contract that we had. where there was no intention of trying to become one of America's finest employers. There was simply an intention to get the job done, and they didn't really care who they steamrolled in between. And so my team said, well, what are we going to allow this $1 million client to be part of our organization because they represent a nice chunk of our gross volume? And we said, or were we BSing ourselves when we said we're staffing partner to America's finest employer? That kind of galvanizing force really helps you make decisions. And so we couldn't keep this client. We were either lying to ourselves about who we were and who we wanted to be, or we were honest, and we knew we were honest and we meant this with full integrity. So we had to drop those clients, and we did drop 2 of them because of that $2 million clients. And in both cases, I have to tell you, we were mature enough, and I was willing to get out of the way enough that my team replaced the business. This happened over 2 different years, but they replaced the business within 90 days. So, it was really nice to see that they were inspired and galvanized, and they had integrity. Blowing the wind beneath my wings was a song that that was kind of like our theme song, and so they had integrity to lift their sales, and experience and excellence as well.
Fantastic. It was a courageous thing right there. I loved how you gave them a clear map of what matters most. Here's what the values and or mission that we're a part of, and we're going to make this real. Your comment, is this real or is this BS? Got to speak truth. You mentioned the 6 hats. I'll point out 2 resources for our audience about that. So if you were to search up Edward DeBono, DeDono, unfortunately he's passed away now, but it was a thinker, a famous thinker on how to think. He wrote a book called The 6 Thinking Hats. There's a business version of that I ended up putting in a chapter of the Maui Millionaires, a book I wrote, I believe it was 20-ish years ago. He talks about the black, yellow, red, green, blue, and white hats. Each hat referred to a different thinking style. White hat was pure information. The black hat was, how do I look at this thing like my attorney or my protector hat? How do I spot what could go wrong so I can avoid that or protect myself? My green hat is my creative hat, etc. And the key with that was that when you're in a meeting, you don't want everyone wearing different hats. If you have a black hatter, your quote Debbie Downer, so to speak, and she's constantly having the black hat on where everyone else is wearing other colors, it becomes a lot of frictions in the meeting. But instead we say, hey, everyone, let's just for a moment, for 2 minutes, let's brainstorm all the things that could go wrong. Put your black hats on. And if we can do that, a hat is something we can put on and take off, and it lowers the perceived difficulty of switching thinking styles. So I love that. I'm curious, when you said your team replaced that business within 90 days, going forward, did that take root culturally? I can't think of a better way of creating culture that says that we take this serious about working with America's finest employers, right? That we mean what we say by you taking the stand of supporting them in what was in a short-term basis a painful financial decision. I'm curious, did that take root in the culture beyond there?
Oh, it sure did. It built confidence, and it also gave people so much energy and confidence to go out and knock on doors of maybe companies that they might have been a little intimidated by, or the sales reps would go out and try to work on it. And funny story about that, I acquired Ames Healthcare Staffing, and we went out to visit the Children's Hospital, who was one of their largest accounts. At that time, they were doing about $500,000 a year with Children's Hospital. And so when it was time to go introduce myself, the president took me to the head of HR VP at the hospital, and he said, well, tell me about you, and why should I go with you? Just because you bought this company, I'm not obligated to continue doing business with you now. And I said, well, I hope, we would hope to earn your business. And as part of one of the reasons that made Ames very attractive to us, because of their relationship with you. And we feel that you are, you fit our criteria. We are the staffing partner to America's finest employers. And the answer that he gave was, well, we're not yet, but we sure aspire to. So I guess we better hang out with you. It was great. It was great. And by the way, another surgeon, another organization, medical organization we talked about, I told that story and they said, well, maybe we're partners to America's finest surgeons.
I love it that smart entrepreneurs borrow from wherever we can.
That's right.
There's something else you said I want to get to that I'm going to ask really my final line of inquiry for our conversation today, Patty. But you had talked in there about building a company wherein the team feels able to share the tough truths. And so there's a concept I want our audience to hear. It's called psychological standing. And I'll give the analogy, when I go to a playground when my kids were younger and I see one of the other kids is doing something slightly on the edge of safe or unsafe, climbing on the outside of the playground or something, it's awkward for me as someone else's dad to look over and see that. Should I say something? Should I come over and make sure that the kid's okay? If they're up on the tree and they're 40 stories up, I'm going to say or do something. But when it's on the edge, I don't have psychological standing. So I try to make sure with our clients that we coach them to make sure their team doesn't just have permission to be involved. Let's shift that to another level. It's your duty to be honest and to bring this stuff up. It's your responsibility that this is part of the reason you're on the payroll. This is how you create value by bringing these things up so that we collectively can solve and move forward. We don't fix the blame here, we fix the problem. But to do that, we have to be honest with what's going on. Any comment about that? Then I'm going to bring us to our last line of question.
Yeah, I think when a company starts to grow and you hire your first senior VP or maybe an operating division general manager or president or something, it's a tough dance between knowing how much to roll out with them. If you were going to hire a number one, say for a company over 5 million, I would allow that person maybe 6 to 12 months rolling before they assume all of the responsibilities. So that they really can live and feel the culture of your organization, and they can help you shape the refined culture that needs to come out of the evolution. So you got to allow them time. The other thing is, when you are bringing on people, any people, whether it be your right hand, an administrative assistant, or a CEO, they have to know the limits of their responsibilities and authorities, and they have to know what the rules are, and they have to have judgment to know when it's okay to break the rules. And in my feeling that your policies, procedures, standard operating procedures are going to be good for you 80 to 97% of the time. Sometime in that 20 to 3%, where the rule is contradictory. This happens in medicine all the time. You give this pill for that, but except for when this happens, then it would kill you, right? So it's the same kind of thing. So you want to empower your people so that they are confident enough that they know that, okay, this is the 1 in 10, that the policy shouldn't apply. And I've got to know whether I have permission to disregard the policy and just handle it, or whether my protocol is I need to run something up the flagpole and say, this is an exception. I want to do it this way. Is that okay? And frankly, I think your empowered people are the ones who have the judgment, have experience, and know when to break the rules, and then also understand when the appropriate time to inform about it is. It may be a minor thing, but maybe not. And my philosophy was with my people, I don't want any bad surprises. I love good surprises. I love presents, surprises, but no bad surprises. So if you see something bad coming down the pike, you better share it with me.
I love it. You want to know that fast and early. That's not the one to hold off on if there's a big thing going on with that part. I think that's important. And Patty, my last question for you comes around with this. What's the last piece of advice you would give to a business owner where he or she wants to scale their company? It's growing, but they've reached the kind of toward the boundaries of what they're currently knowing what to do, or or that maybe they're a little intimidated about growing it further, or maybe it's going well, but they're kind of bursting at the seams and feeling that sense of overwhelm, trying to keep up with the growth that they have. What are the final pieces or piece of advice you would have to that business owner if you were coaching them?
It's important to remember that we grow and we need to upgrade our mentors, our coaches, and our advisors as we grow. Also, Maui does such a beautiful job of helping people upgrade their peer group because that network that we have of people that we can call unofficially to get some input, I think, is really helpful. It's important to remember that more businesses fail than succeed. And so those businesses that succeed, it's not just by luck. I mean, we can get lucky sometimes in the beginning, like I was when I naively started my company, but you don't stay successful by being lucky. So having an upgraded peer group, upgrading coaches, and the final thing that I would say is, I got a quick story, if I may.
Please.
I have very, very successful dental practice that's a client. And he recently came over to have me coach him about a year ago. And he said he'd been in a coaching group for the previous 5 years. And I said, well, if you already have a coach, why are you here? What is it that you're seeking that you're not getting from that other organization? He says, I've really outgrown them. And after about 3 months of coaching, he's decided to upgrade his business, recruit a couple more partners, buy his building. And he said to me, he said, I love this new peer group. I love my new advisors. He goes, last year at this time, I was in my mentoring mastermind and we were worrying about whether we should be paying $20 an hour or $22 an hour to somebody in our office. He said that was the big debate. We spent 4 hours discussing it and trying to make a decision about that. He says, this year I'm setting up my estate plan and I am buying my building for over $5 million. He says, so that's an example of it. So my bottom line is all champions have coaches.
I think that that's really sage counsel. And I love the example of the level at which you're thinking stuck at. Am I worrying about the $2 per hour on the position that maybe I've got 15 or 25 employees at, or the bigger choice of things like, am I going to actually make the purchase for my building, which is probably 2 magnitudes larger of a decision. And I love that. Peer group, mentors, coaches, advisors, those are all people who influence how we play with that. Patty, as always, every time I leave a conversation with you, I come away, my head spinning with good ideas. You can't see it here, but I'll kind of hold them up here. I've got from right here 5 pages of notes from things that you've said here as we've been going. I come away having profited and learned, and I really appreciate it, knowing that our audience, if they've really been paying attention, they must have taken away at least 4 or 5 really substantive takeaways that are going to help them as a business owner to help make their business more successful. I know you're at a stage in your life where you finding ways to serve others is a huge part of who you are. It's fundamental to who you are, and you're making a difference. And thank you for sharing some of the difference that you make with us here today as part of the Business Coach podcast. Thank you, Patty.
You're so welcome, David. My pleasure.